My name is Myrna Torrance, and I was 34 the winter my grandmother died, and my parents handed me a house they were already sure was worthless. The morning after the funeral, my mom read a typed list out loud in her own living room, and next to my name, there was one line on it: 418 Woodbine Street, a rental on the east side with a dead roof and a furnace older than I am. Everything else had already moved into her name on paper months before my grandmother stopped knowing what day it was. The brick ranch, the duplex, the accounts. My parents called that fair. I didn't call it anything, because I have learned that arguing with a spreadsheet is a waste of a good afternoon. Less than 3 weeks later, a contractor called me from that house and told me to come right now and not to bring my mom. I have spent 10 years telling people what their houses are worth, in writing, with my signature at the bottom. What was behind that wall changed what my own name was worth, and I am the one who ended up paying for it. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet women who finally stop keeping the family's books balanced, and then watch what it costs them to put the numbers back where they belong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My grandmother's name was Winifred Prosser, and she kept every receipt she ever got, going back to 1971, in a cookie tin with a picture of a lighthouse on the lid. Gutter work, a water heater, $206 for a stove in 1984, paid in cash, initialed by a man who has been dead for 20 years. She could not tell you what she had for lunch, but she could tell you which of her houses ate money and which of them behaved. That was how she talked about property. Houses had appetites. Some of them were polite, and some of them were not. I saw her for the last time in November, in the back bedroom of the brick place on Pilcher Lane, with the heat turned up so high my glasses fogged in the doorway. She was thin in a way that made her rings look borrowed. She held my hand with both of hers, which she never did, and she said something I wrote in the margin of my work calendar and then forgot about for 3 months. There's something in that house nobody would ever look at. I asked her which house. She said a few things in a row that did not connect: a name, a year, a road, and then she asked me if I'd eaten. I wrote it down because I write everything down. That is the whole personality, if you want it early. I am the person in the family who writes things down, and for most of my life I believe that made me the honest one. It took a sheet of drywall to teach me the difference between honest and clean. She died on the 9th of January, and my mother had the keys to Pilcher Lane before the cars left the funeral home. I know because I watched her hand a spare set to the cleaning service in the funeral home parking lot, in the cold, still holding the folded program. There is a version of that where it looks like grief management. My mother is very good at that version. At the house afterward there was ham, and there were those little rolls, and about 40 people from church. And at 2 o'clock my mom stood up in her own living room with a sheet of paper and started reading. Not the will. A list. Her list. Who was getting the dining set? Who was getting the quilts? What was going to auction? Which of the rentals would be managed how? People nodded along like it was a bulletin. I sat on the arm of the couch and did what I always do in a room I can't control, which is appraise it. 1992. Build. Vinyl over original siding. Roof at year 18 of a 25-year shingle. 210,000 if the kitchen were newer. The job does not turn off. Not at funerals. Not at weddings. Not in the 11 seconds it takes for your mother to read your entire inheritance out loud. Next to my name there was one line: 418 Woodbine. My dad was standing by the sliding door with a plate he wasn't eating from, and when she read it, he looked out at the yard. He did not look at me for the rest of the afternoon, and at the time I thought that was shame. Portia Blackwell has an office above a shoe store on the square in Grafton, and she talks about death the way a mechanic talks about brakes. On the Thursday after the funeral, she walked us through it in about 20 minutes, and it was the least dramatic meeting of my life, which is exactly why it worked. The brick ranch on Pilcher Lane had gone to my mother by transfer on death deed, signed in 2022, recorded the same week. The bank accounts were payable on death, also my mother. The duplex on Gilby Street had been inside a limited liability company since 2011, and the company was not part of the estate at all. What was left in probate, when you subtracted everything that had been walked out the side door legally and on schedule, was 418 Woodbine Street. And a mortgage. $29,400 still owed on it, from a cash-out refinance in 2016, secured against the house, and the debt rides with the house. Portia said that last part twice, kindly, the way you repeat a diagnosis. So the only thing I inherited had a negative number attached to it, before I ever turned a key. My mother said, "Well, it's a house, honey, and people would kill for a house." My dad studied the carpet. I asked about the codicil, because there was one, added in 2019, and it was the only line in the entire document that mentioned me by name. Portia said it had been drawn up at a routine review. She said someone had suggested it. She did not say who, and I did not think to ask, and I have thought about that omission more than almost anything else since. 2 days later, I was on a ladder under the eaves of a house in West Lafayette, because the world does not stop for anybody's grandmother. I am a licensed residential appraiser. When a bank is deciding whether to hand a stranger $200,000, I am the one who goes and looks at the thing they'd be handing it for. I measure. I photograph. I pull 3 comparable sales and I explain, in writing, why this house is worth more or less than those. The homeowner that day was a nice man in his 60s named on the order sheet as the borrower, and he followed me around with coffee. And in the north bedroom, he put his hand flat on the wall over a brown bloom of old moisture and said, "You don't have to put that in there, do you?" People ask me that constantly. Sometimes they're charming about it. Sometimes they cry. I said I did have to put it in there, and I explained why. And I have explained it so many times that it comes out smooth. My signature at the bottom of that report is not a formality. It is the only thing I own. Take away the license, and I am a woman with a tape measure. So I write down the stain, and I write down the cracked heat exchanger, and I write down the roof that has 4 years left in it. And if that costs somebody a refinance, that is the trade. I was proud of that. I want you to hear how proud I was of that, because it matters later. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was packing up. 6 missed calls, all from my mother inside of an hour. 418. Woodbine is 9 blocks east of my apartment, which sits over a shuttered card shop on Guff Street. So I walked. It was built in 1948, and it has been rented continuously since the year I was born. Front room, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen with a sagging soffit, a basement with a floor drain and a hip-high stain on the foundation wall that I would understand better in about a month. I went through it the way I go through any house, room by room, clockwise, taking pictures of everything whether I need them or not. Roof. Done. Past done. Windows. Originals with storm sash. 3 cracked. Electrical. A 1960s panel with 2 breakers that had been added by somebody with more confidence than training. Furnace. Alive, technically. None of it surprised me. What surprised me was the closet in the back bedroom. It was a shallow closet in a house full of shallow closets, and the back wall of it was drywall. New drywall. Screwed flat, taped, mudded, and painted a white that did not match the white 6 inches to the left of it. In a house where nobody had spent a real dollar in 50 years, somebody had spent a Saturday and about $60 in materials on the back wall of a closet. There was no water stain, no bulge, no reason. And when I put my foot on the closet floor, I felt a ridge under the carpet, a lip of framing where framing had no business being, running the width of the closet like somebody had boxed something in. I took 11 pictures of it. I always take pictures. It is the single habit that saved me. My mother called 3 times in 2 days about selling it, not once about my grandmother. She had a buyer already, which is a strange thing to have for a house that had been mine for 4 days, a company called Whitcomb Property Group, out of Plainfield, that she said buys these older rentals all over this part of the state. Cash. Close in 10 days. No inspection, no appraisal, no repairs, nothing for me to think about. Just sign, honey, and let it be somebody else's headache. I have appraised 3 Whitcomb houses in the counties on either side of us, and I know what their headaches look like when they're finished with them, so I said no. I said it politely, and I said it once. Then I did what a competent person does with an asset. I signed the personal representative's deed at Portia's office and had it recorded. I put the gas and the electric in my name so the pipes wouldn't freeze. I called Prewitt Restoration, because Gus Prewitt has been putting roofs on this town since before I could drive, and I paid him $1,850 up front to start a full condition assessment on the roof and the walls. 4 decisions, all correct. All made inside of 72 hours. All made by a woman who prides herself on moving faster than her family. I want to be very clear about what those 4 decisions were, because a lawyer is going to lay them out for me in a few weeks in a much colder room. They were 4 nails. And I hammered every one of them in myself, on purpose, feeling good about it, while my mother sat at home and waited for me to be exactly who I have always been. Gus Prewitt is 61, has 2 guys and 1 truck, and he does not speculate. He'll tell you the roof is shot. He will not tell you what he thinks about your marriage. He walked 418 with me on a Friday afternoon in a canvas coat. And he agreed with everything I had already written down until we got to the back bedroom. Then he stopped agreeing and started knocking. He knocked on the closet wall low, then high, then off to the left, where the original plaster was. He tipped his head like a man listening to an engine. He said, "You hear that?" I did. The plaster gave back a dull, dense sound. The new drywall gave back a drum. He got out a tape and measured the closet, then went out into the bedroom and measured along the outside wall, and then he stood there doing arithmetic with his lips moving. He said the closet was short, something like 30 inches short, into the knee wall under the slope of the roof, and somebody had framed across it and skinned it and painted it. He asked if my grandmother had ever mentioned work being done in there. I said my grandmother mentioned everything, twice, with the receipt. He nodded slowly at that, and then he said, "The thing I have replayed more than anything else anybody said to me that whole winter, because he said it gently, and because he was right. I'll open it a week from Monday. If it's dead space, it's an hour and I'll patch it. If it's not dead space, don't be here." I laughed. He didn't. He wrote the date on the back of his estimate sheet and put it in his coat, and I walked home in the dark thinking about squirrels. On the Monday before Gus was due to start, I did the boring thing that turns out to be the whole story. I called the county building department, because that is a call I make 11 times a week for work, and I can do it in my sleep. I gave the parcel number for 418 Woodbine and asked for the permit history. The woman on the other end typed for a while and then said, in the flat voice of a person reading a blank screen, "There's nothing here." I asked her to check the scanned records before the system went digital. She said the system went digital in 1989, and there was nothing before that in the box either. No roof permit, no electrical permit, no mechanical, no structural, no demolition, no nothing, not once, in the entire recorded life of that address. Which is not, by itself, a crime in a town like this. Half the older rentals in Gasper County have been repaired by a cousin on a weekend, but then I pulled the tax filings, because a rental property files a schedule, and the schedules were the opposite of the permit file. Repairs and maintenance claimed every single year. 11,000 one year, 6,000 another. 9 years of money going into a house that never once got a piece of paper pulled on it, and never once got a new roof. And I have stood in that house, and I can tell you exactly where all that repair went, which is nowhere. Money in, work out, and no trail in either direction. I sat at my kitchen table with 2 windows open on my laptop and felt the first cold thing move through me. Then I opened a 3rd window and typed the address into my own appraisal archive. I did not open that 3rd window all the way, not that morning. Instead, I drove 3 miles north to my parents' place on Bonner Road for Sunday dinner that had been moved to Monday because of the funeral, and I asked one question over pot roast. I asked why there was brand new drywall in the back closet at Woodbine. My father put his fork down before I got to the end of the sentence. He said he didn't remember. He said it fast, and he said it to the gravy boat. And my dad has never in his life answered a question that quickly. My mother did not miss a beat. She said houses get patched. That's what houses are, and then she told a story. There was a place over on the west side, she said. Nice little bungalow, and an appraiser wrote a foundation crack into a report on it in 2009. Just wrote it down. Word got around. That whole block sat cheap for 4 years, she said, and a widow 2 doors down couldn't sell and died in a house she didn't want to be in. My mother is not a shouter. She served the beans while she told me this. Then she looked up and delivered it like she was reciting the weather. Nobody ever got poor writing a number down smaller. They got poor because somebody else did. My father got up to get more ice he didn't need. I sat there in the kitchen I grew up in, and for the first time in my adult life I understood that my mother had a philosophy, an actual worked out one, and that she had been living inside it since long before I was born. I went home and opened the third window. Chain of title first, because that is the spine of everything, and it read clean and dull the way most of them do. Winifred Prosser, warranty deed, 1971. Then a mortgage in 1998. Satisfied. Then a cash-out refinance in June of 2016. $48,000 taken out against 418 Woodbine, signed by Glenna Torrance as attorney in fact, under a power of attorney my grandmother had granted her in 2014. Then a second refinance in 2017 against the Gilby Street duplex. Both loans through the same lender, both requiring an appraisal. So I went to my archive, which I keep for 5 years because that is the rule, and further back because I am who I am. And I searched the address, and both reports came up. The June 2016 report on Woodbine, the 2017 report on Gilby. My name is on the certification page of each one, my signature, my license number, the residential one I had held for less than a year at that point, because I was 24 years old. I remember my mother handing me the order and saying it was just a form. Honey, the bank needs a form. I remember being proud that somebody wanted my signature at all. I sat there and scrolled to the photo pages of the June 2016 report, and there is a picture I took myself of the back bedroom of 418 Woodbine with the closet door open. The drywall in that photograph is already there, already painted. 3 months old, maybe less. And I appraised that house at $74,500, and I did not put a single word about that closet in the report, because I did not look. Bernadette Wingate trained me. She is 68, she sold her firm in 2019, and she now does review work out of a sunroom full of orchids that she is slowly killing. I went out there Tuesday with a pretext about comparable sales in the older East Side neighborhoods, which was thin, and she let it be thin. We talked about roofs for a while. Then she told me a story about a man we both used to see at continuing education, a good appraiser, careful, 30 years in. He did 4 reports for his brother-in-law's refinances over a decade. Every number in them was defensible. Every measurement was right. He simply never disclosed on the certification page that the borrower was family because it did not occur to him that anybody would care, because in his mind he had been fair. Somebody complained about something else entirely and the board went through his files. She said the word for it is not fraud. The word for it is a disclosure failure, and it is a violation of the ethics rule whether or not the number was honest, and that distinction is the entire point, because the rule is not about whether you cheated. The rule is about whether anybody can check. He got suspended. He paid a fine. That was 10 years ago and he is still working. And every single report he signs today carries a line disclosing prior disciplinary action, and every panel application asks him about it, and he answers it, forever. Bernadette repotted an orchid while she said all this. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said one more thing, and did not ask me a single question about why I was there. The board can't take anything from you that you hand them first. Gus called at 9:41 on the Monday he had circled. I know the time because it is still in my phone, and I have looked at it more than I would like to admit. His voice was wrong immediately. Gus talks like a man leaning on a truck. This was slow and it was formal, and it had a strange, careful politeness in it, the kind people use when somebody official is standing 3 feet away. He said, "Ms. Torrance, he has called me Myrna since I was 9. Ma'am," he said, We found something in the wall. Behind him there was a sound I could not place for a second and then could. A radio, the compressed chirp of a shoulder mic, and then another one answering it. I asked him what he found. He didn't answer that. There was a pause with wind in it, like he had stepped outside onto the porch, and then his voice dropped almost to nothing. "The police are here," he said. "Come now." And then, because Gus Pruitt has known my family for 40 years and is not a stupid man, he added the part that was not in any of this for me yet. The part I did not understand until much later that same day. "Come alone. Don't bring your mom." I said, "Okay." I hung up. I picked up my keys and my hand was shaking so badly that I dropped them twice on the counter, so I put them down, and I put on my coat, and I walked. 9 blocks east in February, past the laundromat and the church parking lot, and the house with the flag. It took me 18 minutes and I do not remember any of them. There were 3 vehicles at the curb and yellow tape strung from the maple to the porch post to the fence, and Gus was standing on the sidewalk with his hat in his hands like a man at a graveside. A deputy walked me in as far as the bedroom doorway and no farther. The closet was open. The new drywall was gone, cut out in one clean rectangle, and behind it was a cavity in the knee wall about waist high and not quite 3 feet deep, running back under the slope of the roof. Inside it, arranged the way things get arranged when somebody leaves in a hurry, was a stack of glass jars with a layered brown residue dried in rings. Coffee filters, dozens of them, gone the color of weak tea, pressed flat in a block. Lengths of clear plastic tubing, a plastic funnel. The subfloor under all of it had gone a bad honey color and had eaten downward into the wood in a pattern like a map. And back in the corner, tipped on its side, a small propane cylinder with the brass fitting corroded a bright, wrong chemical blue. A detective named Paula Gessner from the sheriff's drug unit came out onto the porch and told me what it was in the plainest possible language, and I sat down on the top step in my good coat. Here is the thing nobody expects about me. And it is not flattering. I was not frightened. In about 3 seconds before I had any feeling at all, I had already run the numbers, because that is what my brain does when it is scared and will not admit it. Value, 0. Not low, 0. Unsellable, unrentable, uninsurable. $29,400 still owed on a thing that is now worth nothing, and taxes still running, and my name, on the deed, recorded 12 days ago. That is when I went pale. And then I turned my head and saw the rectangle of cut drywall lying face down on the frozen grass by the porch steps where they'd set it, and the back of it had a carpenter's pencil mark on it the way the back of every sheet in every wall in America does. A date. 3/16, and 2 initials. I have been looking at that handwriting on Christmas boxes in a storage shed my entire life. They kept me there until almost 4. A state police team came with a truck and suits and inventoried the cavity, and a woman from the county health department named Bonnie Gaskell stapled an orange notice to the front door, and then took a picture of the orange notice on the front door, which struck me as very thorough and very final. Detective Gessner explained the rest of it to me on the tailgate of a truck, in the voice of somebody who has explained this 200 times and has stopped expecting anybody to take it well. I was not a suspect. Nobody thought I cooked anything in a house I had owned for 11 days. But the owner of record is the party responsible for decontamination under state law, and the property gets reported and listed on the state's public registry of contaminated properties, and it stays listed until a qualified inspector certifies that it has been cleaned to standard. Not the person who did it. The owner. Today's owner. I asked who did it. She said the last tenant they could tie to it was a man named Perry Whitlatch, who rented the place from March of 2013 to November of 2015, and who died of an overdose in a car outside Bluffton in the summer of 2016. So there was nobody to charge, there was nobody to sue. There was a dead man, a hole in a wall, and me. Gessner clicked her pen and asked me the most ordinary question in the world, the one that turned this from a bad financial event into the thing I am actually telling you about. She said, "So who's rented it since?" The estimate came back on Thursday. A qualified inspector, the kind the state certifies for exactly this, walks the structure, swabs surfaces, and writes a remediation plan, and then a contractor prices it. Full residue survey. Remove all porous materials, which means carpet, drywall, insulation, cabinets, subfloor in the affected rooms. Replace the entire heating and air system because the ductwork moved that air through the house for 2.5 years. Seal. Encapsulate. Resample. Certify. $36,400. I called my insurance agent and I had my answer in under 4 minutes, which I appreciated even while it was happening. A dwelling fire policy on a rental excludes pollution. It excludes damage arising from criminal acts of an occupant, and it excludes losses that occurred before the current policy period. And this loss occurred in 2015, when I was renting an apartment in Greencastle and had never heard of any of it. Property taxes kept running. The mortgage kept running. That night, I did something I have never done in 10 years of practice, which is that I sat down and worked up a value on a property I own, honestly, the way I would for a client. And when I got to the reconciliation page, I could not write a number in it. Not a low one. There isn't a low one. There is no market for a house that cannot legally be occupied and carries a public listing that follows the parcel. I typed a dash. Then I picked up the phone and called Portia Blackwell and asked her the question I should have asked 11 days earlier, which was whether I could simply refuse the whole thing. Portia asked me 3 questions. Had I accepted the keys? Yes. Had I signed and recorded the deed? Yes. Had I paid any expense of the property out of my own funds? Yes. $1,850 to Prewitt Restoration on the 4th day, by check, cleared. She capped her pen. A disclaimer, she said, only works if you have not accepted any benefit of the gift, and possession is a benefit, and paying to improve it is about as clear an acceptance as exists. That door closed the afternoon you wrote that check. I said I didn't know. She said, that's right, you didn't, and that's the whole trick of it. And she was not being cruel, she was being accurate, which is worse. I sat in my car in front of the shoe store for a while. Here is what I understood, and it is the least comfortable sentence in this entire story. Nobody outsmarted me. Nobody lied to me. I did every single thing correctly and quickly, the way I have done everything since I was 19, and my speed was the mechanism. 4 decisions in 72 hours, all defensible, all mine. My mother did not have to trap me. She only had to know me, and she has known me since the day I was born. And I thought about her at that dinner table, telling me about a bungalow and a widow, and it came back around in a way I did not enjoy. Nobody ever got poor writing a number down smaller. I had just written one down smaller than any I have ever written, and it was mine. On the way out, Portia said one more thing through the door. Whoever suggested that Codicil knew you'd move fast. You always do. Detective Gessner's question would not leave me alone, so I answered it myself. Because that is a research problem, and research problems are the one kind of problem I am never afraid of. Rental history came from 3 places: the tax schedules, which list rental income by year, the utility transfers, and Gwen Poplin, 74, who has lived next door since 1979 and remembers the summer of 2014 because of the smell, which she reported to my mother twice and was told was the drains. After March of 2016, 3 tenancies. A young couple, 16 to 19, no children, moved to Brazil for work. Then nothing for 2 months. Then, from May of 2019 to August of 2021, a woman named Petra Gowan, with a baby girl born that February. Gwen remembered the ambulance. November, cold, no siren, which she said is worse. And when I pulled the county court records, because I pull county court records the way other people check the weather, I found a small claims judgment entered in January of 2022. Bracken Hill Properties, my parents' management company, against Petra Gowan for breaking her lease. $2,180. Granted by default because she did not appear. Still sitting on her credit. I put the floor plan up on my screen next to the police diagram of the cavity, and I measured it. Because measuring is what I have instead of praying. The crib would have been against the interior wall. That is where you put a crib, away from the window, away from the draft. Which put a sleeping child, for 2 years and 3 months, less than 4 steps from that closet. I waited for my dad, Bert Torrance, by his truck outside the grocery store on a Wednesday, because I knew he shopped Wednesdays, and I knew he would not lie to me standing up in a parking lot the way he could sitting down at his own table. He saw me and his shoulders went. He didn't ask what I wanted. He put the bags in the bed and stood there in the cold and told me, and it took him about 4 minutes. March of 2016. Whitlatch had been evicted in the fall and the place sat, and my dad went in to clean it out himself to save the cost, and he opened that closet. He said he sat down on the closet floor and stayed there 40 minutes. He said he knew what it was. He said he even knew there was a number to call. And then he did the arithmetic that my mother had taught him over 30 years of marriage, report it, and the house goes to 0, and the registry listing follows the parcel, and my mother loses the house her father moved her into when she was 12. He drove to the building supply on the highway and bought 3 sheets of drywall and a box of screws and a gallon of sealing white. It took him a Saturday. He told me all this the way a man describes a car accident he was not at fault for. Then he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said the sentence that ended something between us permanently. If you say I told you this, I'll say you're lying. I have to. She's my wife. He gave me the key to the storage shed on his way into the truck. The old screws are still in a coffee can in there. Legally, that is worth nothing at all. I took it anyway. My mother came to Woodbine on a Saturday. She did not cross the tape. She walked around the side of the house to the basement door, which is not taped, because basement doors never are, and she waited for me down there in the cold with her coat buttoned. She pointed at the foundation wall. There is a stain on it, hip high, and I had photographed it on my first walkthrough and written water intrusion, historical. She said, that was March of 76. She said her father had been let go from the foundry over in Bostwick the previous fall, and they moved out of the good house on the west side and into this one, and 6 weeks later the creek came up and everything they had put on the basement floor was ruined, and she was 12, and her mother woke her up and gave her 20 minutes to pack what mattered. She said all of this in the voice you'd use to read a recipe. No tears, no apology, no invitation for me to feel anything about it. Then she turned around and looked at me, and I watched her decide to use it, right there, in front of me. She said, you've seen the appraisals by now. I know you have. You've had that look since the funeral. And then she said it, quiet, almost fond. You can't touch this without touching yourself, honey. That's the only reason it works. And I understood the codicil. It was never contempt. It was a lock, and I was the key that fit it. And she had put it in place in 2019. If you are watching this and somebody in your family is asking you to sign for something, take the keys to something, pay one small bill on something before you know exactly what it is, stop. Ask what it is first, in writing. And tell me in the comments about the time you were handed a gift that turned out to weigh more than it looked. Subscribe if you have ever carried one. Petra Gowan lives in Greenwood, 62 miles north, a little over an hour up Interstate 65 with the afternoon traffic. I sat in her driveway for 11 minutes before I got out. She opened the door with the chain on. When I said my last name, her face changed, and she said, Bracken Hill. And I said yes. That's my mother's company. And she did not invite me in, and she was right not to. She was not soft about any of it. She told me she called about the smell in that closet 4 times in the first year. She was told old houses smell. She was told to run the fan. She told me her daughter had bronchitis 3 times before she was 2 and was in the hospital for 2 nights in November of 2020, and that she broke the lease in August of 2021 because she could not afford a 5th doctor's visit, and that my mother took her deposit and then took her to court and won $2,180 from her because she was working a double and did not go to the hearing. Then she stopped and said, "Why are you here?" I told her everything. The cavity. the date on the back of the drywall, my father on the closet floor for 40 minutes, my own signature on the appraisal 3 months after. A girl came down the hall behind her with a cup of milk, 7 years old, entirely uninterested in us, and went back into a room. I said the only true thing I had. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here because you had a right to know in 2019, and my family made sure you didn't. She closed the door. 40 minutes later, back on the highway, my phone rang with a Bloomington number. Bridget Gilroy does plaintiff work out of an office in Bloomington, and she did not flatter me for 1 second. She said the hard part of a case like this is not the wall. The wall is documented, photographed, inventoried by the state. The hard part is medicine. Proving that residue exposure in a specific house caused a specific child's specific illness is expensive, and it is not a sure thing, and she would not pretend otherwise, and I appreciated her for it more than she knows. What a case like this actually turns on, she said, is knowledge. If the owners did not know, it is a tragedy. If the owners knew and re-rented it to a woman with an infant, and then sued that woman for leaving, it is something else with a different name and a different number attached. So everything depends on establishing the date the cavity was sealed. I told her about the pencil mark. She was patient. She said initials on the back of a sheet of drywall are not going to do it. Anybody can write initials. There is no chain of custody, no handwriting analysis worth the cost, and my father will deny it. And a jury will hear a daughter with a grudge. What would do it, she said, is a dated professional inspection of the interior of that house from the spring or summer of 2016, with photographs, field notes, and a sketch. Something done by somebody licensed on a specific day, for a specific purpose, retained in a work file. She let that sit there. I said, June 9th, 2016. She said, whose file? I said mine. And Bridget Gilroy put her pen down and asked me the question I had been walking around for 2 weeks. Are you willing to be a witness against your own file? Nobody accused me of anything. That is not how it works in a business this small. Porter Bogard, who coordinates the appraisal panel at Beacon Ridge Valuation Services, and who has sent me steady work for 6 years, wrote me an email that was short and perfectly courteous. They were pausing new assignments to me pending clarification of a compliance matter. He did not say which one. He did not have to. My name was now attached to a parcel that was about to appear on a state registry, and an appraiser whose name appears on a registry is a question mark, and question marks do not get orders. Pemberton Savings Bank, which is the other half of my income, did not answer 2 emails. Their loan officer did answer the phone once and was extremely warm and told me nothing. In the space of 9 days, my next month's work went from a full calendar to 3 private jobs, an estate division and 2 tax appeals, which together would not cover half of what I owed the county in taxes on a house nobody could enter. I did the math on my own household the way I do it on strangers. Rent, car, insurance, the fine I did not yet know was coming, and $36,400 sitting out there like weather. 11 weeks of savings. And that is, if I stopped eating out and did not fix the transmission. I was sitting at the table doing that arithmetic when my mother texted me for the first time since the basement. A single line on the screen at 9 at night. I have good news. The good news came on letterhead 2 days later. Whitcomb Property Group offered $58,000, cash, as is, closing in 14 days, with full knowledge of the condition and the pending health department action. Attached was a mutual release and a non-disparagement clause, which is a very ordinary thing to see in a settlement, and which, read slowly, meant I would agree not to discuss the property or its history with any third party. And one clean line stating that the buyer would undertake abatement by a method of its choosing consistent with applicable minimums. I ran it in 4 seconds because I always run it in 4 seconds. 58,000 pays off the 29,400 and leaves me about 28,000 after fees, which covers the taxes and 8 months of living and lets me go quietly back to work with a clean license and no registry entry in my name at all. I want you to sit with how good that offer was. It was not a trick. It was legal. It was generous by the standards of a contaminated parcel, and any reasonable person would have taken it. I have appraised 3 Whitcomb properties in the 2 counties east of here. I know what applicable minimums look like when they are finished. Surface treatment in the affected room, paperwork, a certificate, a fresh coat, and a rent sign in the yard by fall. And the person listed on the second page as the seller's family liaison, authorized to negotiate on my behalf, a role I had not granted anyone, was Glenna Torrance. Not illegal, not even unusual. Just the way that world runs. The offer expired Friday at 5. The County Board of Health hearing on the property was Friday at 9. I drove out to the Orchid sunroom one more time and I told Bernadette Wingate all of it, start to finish, without softening the part about myself. She listened the way she used to listen to my first field reports, which is to say, without expression and without interrupting. Then she got a legal pad and wrote the price down in a column, because she is my teacher, and that is what she does. A self-report of an ethics violation on 2 assignments, family relationship undisclosed, 2016 and 2017. Likely outcome, given no evidence of value inflation and given voluntary disclosure. Suspension of 90 days. A civil penalty, probably $2,500. 15 hours of additional education at my own expense. And then she wrote the last line and underlined it twice. Permanent disciplinary history. Disclosed on every report, every panel application, every state renewal, every day I work, for the rest of my career. She said, "That is not a season. That is a fact about you now." Then she put the pen down and said the fairest thing anybody said to me that whole winter. She said, "Nobody is making you do this. Bridget Gilroy might win without you or she might lose with you. Your grandmother is dead and she is not keeping score. And I am not going to tell you what to do, because if I tell you, you will do it for me. And then in 10 years, you'll hate me for it." She walked me to the car. She said one more thing at the door, the same thing she'd said before, which I now understood was not comfort, but instruction. The board can't take anything from you that you hand them first. I went home and opened a blank report and typed an address into it. I worked until a little after 3 in the morning and I did 2 things. The first was an appraisal report on 418 Woodbine Street. Done properly, done to standard, 22 pages, with my interest as owner disclosed in bold on the first page, and a clear statement that the report could not be used for any lending purpose by anyone, ever. I wrote the condition section the way I would write it for a stranger. Documented residue contamination from clandestine manufacture, confirmed by state inventory, pending health department action, subject property not legally habitable, no market exists in the current condition. Remediation estimate $36,400 from a qualified inspector. I attached the photographs, all of them, including the 11 I took of a closet on the first day I owned the place, before anybody knew anything, when I still thought the worst thing about that house was the roof. That report has no legal force. It cannot make anybody do anything. What it can do is be read into a public record by the owner of record, in words a county health board is required to write down. The second thing I did was shorter. 4 paragraphs to the State Appraiser Licensing Board, self-reporting that on June 9, 2016, and again in 2017, I performed appraisal assignments on properties owned or controlled by my parents without disclosing that relationship on the certification, in violation of the ethics rule, and that I was requesting review and accepting whatever discipline followed. I attached both reports. I put it in an envelope, and I put a stamp on it, and I set it on the counter by my keys. And then I left it there, all night, unmailed, because I wanted to still be able to change my mind at 7 in the morning, and I want to be honest with you that I thought about it. I thought about $28,000 and a clean license and a mother I could still have Thanksgiving with. At 7:15, I walked past the blue box outside the post office on the way to the courthouse. The Board of Health meets in the annex room on the second floor of the Gasper County Courthouse, and it holds 14 folding chairs, a projector with a loud fan, and a smell of coffee that has been on the burner since the 80s. Dr. Byron Pomeroy chairs it. He is 63, He is the county health officer, and he runs a meeting like a man who wants to be at lunch. Bonnie Gaskell presented the sampling first, room by room, and put the numbers on the screen, and read out that the property had been reported and was pending listing on the state registry. Nobody in the room reacted. It was all very procedural, which is the thing nobody tells you about the days that decide your life. Then Barlow Gant stood up. Gant Environmental Services. 6 slides. A good suit. Contracted by the prospective purchaser, and he was polite and competent, and he made a genuinely reasonable argument. Limited abatement. Treat the affected bedroom and closet. Encapsulate, clean, and test the return ductwork, rather than replace the system. Resample. Certify. 1/3 the cost. He said it does the job, and it keeps a structure in the housing stock in a county that does not have enough of it. And then he said the line that I have thought about every week since, because I understand exactly where it comes from, and I still think it is the most dangerous sentence in this whole story. There's no sense making a house worthless twice. Gwen Poplin was in the front row with her purse on her lap. 2 other neighbors sat behind her. Petra Gowan and Bridget Gilroy were in the last row by the door, and Petra did not look at me once. A kid from the Grafton Bulletin sat off to the side writing in a reporter's notebook with a ballpoint. And in the 3rd row, on the aisle, with her coat folded over her knees exactly the way she folds it in church, was my mother. She had not spoken to me since the basement. She did not speak to me now. Dr. Pomeroy looked down at his sheet, checked something with his pen, and said, "The owner of record is present. Ms. Torrance, do you wish to be heard?" I stood up. I have a courtroom voice from years of tax appeals, and I made myself use the slow version of it because my hands were not steady and the voice is easier to control than the hands. I said that I was the owner of record and that I opposed the limited abatement proposal, and I asked the board to order full decontamination to the state standard, complete removal of porous materials, complete replacement of the heating and air system, sealing, re-sampling, and certification by a qualified inspector. I said I understood that the cost of the order I was requesting fell on me, and that I was aware the figure was $36,400, and that I was aware the parcel would remain on the public registry until certification, and that I was not asking for relief from any part of that. Mr. Gant said, reasonably, that an owner cannot demand a remedy stricter than the state minimum. Dr. Pomeroy said an owner can decline to contest one. Mr. Gant sat down. Then I read the condition section of my own report into the record, and when I got to the end of it, I kept going, because the rest was not in the report. I told them the cavity was sealed in March of 2016, 7 weeks before the property was re-rented. I told them who sealed it, and I said his name, and I said he would deny it, and that they should weigh it accordingly. And then I did the part that nobody in that room had come to hear and nobody had asked for. I told them that on June 9th of 2016, 3 months after that wall went up, an appraisal of that property was performed for a $48,000 cash-out refinance, and that the appraiser who inspected that house, photographed that bedroom, and signed that certification was me. I told them the borrower of record was my grandmother, acting through my mother under a power of attorney, and that I did not disclose on either that assignment or a second one the following year that the parties were my immediate family, and that this is a violation of the ethics rule that governs my license whether or not my numbers were sound. I told them that at 7:15 that morning I had mailed a self-report and a consent to discipline to the state licensing board, with copies of both files attached. The projector fan was the only sound in the room. My mother said one thing to me in that basement, weeks ago, and it was the truest thing she has ever said to me. "You can't touch this without touching yourself, honey. That's the only reason it works." I said it out loud, right there, so it would be in the minutes with everything else. She was right. I touched it anyway. And I did not look at the 3rd row, not once, because I already knew what would be on her face, and because I had finally understood something about myself that morning at the Blue Box. I mailed it first, and then I spoke, so that there would be no version of this where I could still take it back. Barlow Gant asked for a moment, stepped into the hallway with his phone, came back, and requested that his proposal be withdrawn so the prospective purchaser could reevaluate. By 2 that afternoon, Whitcomb Property Group had withdrawn its offer entirely, and I understood why. Their model does not need a bargain. Their model needs a quiet file, a parcel with a full public record, a dated statement of concealment in the minutes, and a plaintiff's attorney in the back row is not quiet, and quiet is the only thing they were actually buying. The board voted 4-0. Property declared unfit for human occupancy. Full decontamination ordered to state standard. File transmitted for registry listing with the dates as stated. Dr. Pomeroy asked the recording secretary to make sure the March 2016 date and the June 9th inspection date were both entered, and she read them back. And that was the whole thing. It took less time than the coffee took to get cold. My mother stood up during the vote. She folded her coat over her arm and she walked down the aisle past me, and she went out the door and did not stop. And she said nothing at all. That is the part I did not prepare for. I had braced for a scene. I had rehearsed being calm at a scene. She did not give me one, because a scene would have been an argument, and she does not argue. She just leaves rooms that have stopped being profitable. She has not changed her mind about a single thing. My father was not there. He started a message to me that afternoon, and I watched the dots appear and stop. Twice. And nothing ever came. In the hallway afterward, Petra Gowan came past me with Bridget Gilroy, and she did not say thank you. And I want to be clear that she did not owe me one,